Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about progressive discipline and creating performance plans for employees. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I know I get questions a lot on what's the first step if I've got someone who's got a performance issue. I know we talk a lot about documenting things. And obviously, as attorneys, we find that incredibly important and always recommend documentation. But what should that documentation look like and what should the steps be? And I'm going to start with a good lawyer answer, which is it depends. And it's a little loose in how you might implement things. But what initially comes to mind in disciplining and performance improvement for employees, Russell?
Yeah. So just as a starting point, the concept of progressive discipline, right? Like what that's really talking about is the first step, there's an informal oral reprimand or warning or coaching. And then there's a documented oral reprimand. And then there's a written warning. And then there's a final written warning. And then there's a termination or some variation of that. And in the organized labor union context, following those steps as agreed to in a CBA is important and is required oftentimes. But in a non-labor context, there's more flexibility around that. So I don't know about you, Sarah. It's not something that's always included in a handbook for me. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But when it is, there's usually caveats and language that say you can skip to an appropriate step depending on the severity and the frequency of the conduct. And we don't have to necessarily follow this in lockstep. This is the general outline of how we would go about managing things. And I think that whether you have it in your handbook or not, I think that's a good framework to think about as an employee. If somebody does something really bad, you don't have to give them an informal warning. You might be terminating them right away. So assessing the situation, figuring out where it belongs and how severe the conduct is and how critical the management need is to correct the behavior, I think impacts where you jump in and how you move through this rough outline of steps.
Yeah, and it can be helpful to have form documents for managers as well, though it's going to be a fact specific analysis each time. And definitely, I have a lot of clients that use forms, different things to at least frame up what you want. And that form document, though, could look different depending on whether you're doing a warning or a performance improvement plan, some combination of the two. So sometimes you're putting together something that really is outlining a plan for performance. We need you to do these 5 things. Here's how we're going to achieve that. Here's what the issues are. Sometimes the conduct is something where it's like, you've been late 3 times and this is a written warning. And if you're late again, you're terminated, right? So it's really at the base of it, these types of tools are really their communication tools and their communication tools and documentation tools. You're thinking, all right, well, what is my end goal? You want to start with the end goal in mind and say, what do we want from this employee? Why am I implementing this step? What am I trying to get out of it? Am I hoping this person to actually improve? Which is usually the hope, but sometimes you're not really hopeful that's going to actually happen. Or if the conduct is severe enough, it could be, as I mentioned, stop this behavior or else type of conversation, as opposed to, hey, we need you to pay a little bit more attention to detail in the job that you're doing, or do this a little bit better, improve your skill set. So obviously there's a huge gamut of what you might be needing to address. And that's why I started with the good, it depends answer.
Right. And I think it's also important to remember that the goal is we talk about documenting because we worry that we're going to end up in a lawsuit and we want to have good evidence. The flip side to that is documenting and providing good coaching is the best way to help employees improve. And the old adage, manage people up or out. You want to coach people. The coaching should be coming and the managing should be coming from a place of not just discipline for discipline's sake, but with the idea of trying to improve performance and improve behavior. Because if you get to the point where you don't think any amount of coaching is going to correct the problem, now you're on the termination track and you definitely should still have documentation, but you're headed in a different direction at that point.
Yeah. And it's good to stay on top of these things as well, have those tools, utilize them, and make sure you've got a good plan for when these things happen, because they definitely will. Well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.